Welcome to RECO12. My name is Justin, and I am a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God and a recovering addict, and am blessed to be the host of this meeting and podcast. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking on this path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented so many fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, and we look forward to continuing to add to the diversity of speakers and backgrounds. Today's speaker for the 173rd meeting is Amanda B., who will be speaking on her experience, strength, and hope in regards to the concept of sponsorship, the pipeline to power. We'll get to her talk in the Q&A afterwards here in just a minute, but first a little bit of business. The RECO12 family of recovery resources continues to grow and have more and more resources for the addict and the loved ones of those addicted. RECO12 Shares is one of those super exciting projects that allows anyone at any time to record a solution-based 12-step share, and also to listen to anyone else's experience, strength, and hope at any time, anywhere on your phone in podcast format. Another quickly approaching project is a Big Book Roundtable discussion where we will be swimming through the first 164 pages of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous with a few recovered individuals who are past speakers in RECO12 and who really try to know and live the Big Book. We will also be doing another amazing project on real-life recovery information and solutions as found in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this will be a Q&A that I'll do with Nikki M. in her Noodle It Out with Nikki style. And if that's not enough, another really cool expansion of RECO12 speaker meetings is on the near horizon too. We're going to be doing a more European, Asian, African time zones specific RECO12 speaker meeting twice a month is where we're starting out with one of our past speakers who will be hosting it and moderating it like what I do. Really excited about all these things. They're exciting. Your donations and subscriptions are making this all possible, as there are costs to build and maintain all of this. On that note, RECO12 is a self-supporting service. We appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions through PayPal and Venmo through the links in the chat and the show notes. As we go along, I'll post those a couple of times throughout this, and it will also be in the show notes of the podcast. We also offer a monthly subscription program called RECO12 Spearheads. To join in and help support these cool projects, please consider donating at www.reco12.com/support, or click on the link in the chat of the live meeting and the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm going to introduce today's guest speaker, Amanda B. Here's a little bit about Amanda. Amanda came into the rooms of SLA at the end of June 2022, but quickly found her way to Big Book sponsorship and jumped straight into the steps with her sponsor. She has found the solution to all of her problems by following the instructions that are offered in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Amanda B. loves hearing the stories of others in recovery and finds that she can relate to people in every 12-step recovery room. She finds the similarities and knows she's not alone. Find her each week find her regularly at the Big Book Audio Club meeting. It's like a book club, but for speaker shares on Thursdays at 2 p.m. weekly through July 2023. And then starting the first week of August, it will be the first and third Thursdays. All are welcome to join. To get information on how to join in those, send an email to reco12pod@gmail.com and we'll get you that link and that information. Amanda, the floor is yours. Take it away and share anything you want about that Big Book Audio Club if you wish to.
Thank you so much, Justin. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda B., and I'm a grateful member of SLA and many other rooms like CODA. I feel very at home in all 12-step rooms, like Justin said, and I do feel that I have found the similarities between all addictions, because I know that it stems from a spiritual malady, a lack of connection with higher power, which I choose to call God. So I just want to take a moment to thank God for getting me to my 1-year mark. It's amazing. It's a miracle. And thank you for everyone that is here. It's so nice to see some friends, fellows, my sponsors, some sponsees. Like, this is my family. So I'm really, really grateful to be here. And thank you to Justin B. and to everyone who carries this message. So I'll go right into it. I came to SLA because of a podcast, and it really was a miracle from God. So last summer, June 2022, I had acted out. And part of my addiction is that I'm a chronic cheater. I've been with my husband for 17 years. And in that, there's been cheating emotionally, physically, everything, fantasy, validation. I've done all the things that you can find in slaw, right? And so I had just acted out outside of my marriage, which thank God I no longer do today, but then I did. And I was listening to a podcast because I like to tell people I could never be alone with myself. I just couldn't. I was miserable. And so if I was like quiet, like that was a miracle if I was quiet, but I was always listening to podcasts if I was traveling. So I happened to be traveling from one side of the country I was living to the other, and I was listening to a podcast. And I'm not going to name names. It was two famous people. It wasn't a recovery podcast. And one of the women on this podcast qualified. And she said, like, I'm a sex and love addict. And this is a famous woman. And I was like, oh, what is that? And she went on to describe some of the characteristics, which I don't need to go into today because some other people have, and there's so much information out there. But when she read those, I was like, that's me. Like, I didn't know that was me, but that's me. And I didn't have any internet. I was on a bus in a third world country. And I was like, I need to research this. And I got home and I Googled like slaw and I read the 12 characteristics and I was like, that's absolutely me. And so I tried not to feel too much shame regarding this. I was like, wow, I'm a sex and love addict. I cried a little bit. I was like, maybe I need a therapist. Like, I don't know what I need, but I had an ex who was in AA at one point. And I remember AA really worked for him. So I was like, if slaw uses the same style, like maybe this will work for me. So I went straight into slaw. Like my bio says, I went into the rooms of slaw, whatever I could find online. I just went to it. And I was in a place where I wasn't working full time and I was able to be in recovery 24/7, like just be in meetings. But I was not able to find a sponsor and I wasn't finding solution that was working for me. And that was really frustrating. And I wanted to get well because I wanted to save my marriage. I didn't necessarily care about saving myself, but I understand that like part of this is like working on yourself. But I just wanted to like do something that would help me because everything I had tried in my past did not work. So anyway, I'm in slaw, in the rooms of slaw, and an angel like reaches out to me and she's like, there's this group, it's called Big Book Sponsorship. And we use a workbook and we have like dance party meetings and all this fun stuff. It might not be your cup of tea, but there's a lady, reach out to her and maybe she can get you a sponsor. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I messaged this woman and she also was like a sponsorship connector, a sponsorship angel. And I really she gave me a sponsor and I just said, okay, I just took this sponsor who I didn't know, reached out, and like within 4 days, we're doing the steps. And like my anniversary, I think, is yesterday of step 1. So that's where I am today. I'm in Big Book Sponsorship, and we use a workbook for all addictions, all afflictions. And I love it because that connects me to sponsors in all kinds of rooms. And like I said, like it all stems from a spiritual malady, a lack of connection with God. And you know, like I've always been a person that's believed in God. I was raised with God, but I did not understand how God works in my life. And I definitely lost the way many times. And at one point I became very, very religious, thinking like this was going to fix me. And we have a list of logs. These are failed methods that like they failed to keep us sober. And so like becoming religious was a log for me. It was something I thought like, if I get religious, then I'm going to be fixed. I won't cheat on my husband. I won't fantasize. I'll just be like a good girl, Amanda. But that did not work because faith without works is dead, right? Like if you have faith and you don't actually have the connection with God and pray and like be with God, then like it doesn't really work. And I see a lot of people who have struggled with religion and this. So for me, I became religious because I thought like, oh, this is going to work, but it didn't. So anyway, I get to 12-step recovery, and this is where the magic happens. So my sponsor and I, we read the workbook, right? We have a workbook. It's 40 pages now. I have my original copy, a mucked up version from Cameron, and I have like a digital one with like all the updates because there's a lot of updates. And my favorite page, which is like ripped off, but I have it here, and it says, you are going to become a sponsor. And I wrote AB. So Amanda B, almost out of my last name, is going to be a sponsor. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Like, I want to be a sponsor. It gave me like a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. It gave me something to look forward to in like in all the yuckiness that like I felt with the beginning of recovery. Because sometimes in the beginning, you feel a little yucky. Like you don't have that connection with your higher power. You don't have friends in the room. Like you just don't know what's going on. And so to know that I was going to be a sponsor, I was so excited. And so yeah, that was like the biggest foreshadow. And I always say, like, this is telling you what's going to happen. Like, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to be a sponsor. And so, yeah, sponsoring. So that's what I want to talk about, sponsorship, this pipeline to the power. So this is a little nod to, there's a woman named Nicole S. And she shared that like steps 10 and 11 were the pipeline to the power. And I wrote that in my big book, my big book. And I love that. Like, I was like, yes, that is the pipeline to the power. But I think sponsorship really is the true pipeline to the power. And that's what I want to talk about today. And so, becoming a sponsor has helped me stay in recovery. And that's what we talk about, how you can stay clean and sober, but if you're not really sponsoring, like, you're not carrying the message. And like it says, we tried to carry this message in all of our affairs. And I found that after a year, so like at the 6-month mark, I might have been talking about something different, right? And so now I'm at the 12-month mark, and it's like, yes, I get why it says like we have to help the sick and suffering addicts. Like, this is what keeps me in my program. I know the day that I am no longer sponsoring, I'm likely to relapse so quickly because I've seen it happen. It happened to myself. I definitely like had a moment where I wasn't working my full program, of missing certain pieces, and I had a relapse, and it was so devastating. But the book says it's a boon, right? It's a treasure for me to have this relapse and to learn what to do with it, right? And so we have the tools of this book, and they're very clear-cut instructions. And I love the instructions. I think they're very helpful. And I go to this book all the time, and I will Google like a question into the big book, and I find the answer. So step 12, right? So what I want to talk about is that step 12 is something that we can start on day one. And this is what excites me, is that you come into the room and you have a sponsor and you have this connection with them, and you're looking forward to the end, right? Like, we're kind of like, I was like future tripping, like fantasizing, like, what am I going to be like as a sponsor? It was very exciting, but I also wanted to stay present and like work on each step at a time. But I was definitely excited. But the thing is, I was like, I can't do this until I'm a sponsor. I can't do that until I'm a sponsor. But then finally I realized that like, it's not just about sponsorship. It's also about doing service. And so pretty early on, I learned that like, you could do service in your meetings, right? I don't go to any in-person meetings as of yet because I've lived in a place that didn't have them, but I would do online service. So I was like, how can I help the newcomer? So if I'm here for a month, there's somebody here that's a day, right? How can I help answer maybe their question or get them to the solution? And so I just like really encourage my sponsees and my friends to like be working that step 12 from day one, like serving your family, your community, and like getting to sponsorship. One thing I have noticed as a sponsor who sponsors, like I sponsor many, and at one point it was full on, like probably 5 to 10 people at a time. And now it's 2 to 3. I had a lot of free time this past year, and I was very blessed. But one thing I noticed is that I had a lot of people come to me that have already worked the steps. I was like, you've already worked the steps. Like, what's going on? I was like, are you sponsoring? That's what I always ask. And they say, no, I'm not sponsoring, or I sponsored and I stopped. Right. So like, that is the missing piece from like my data collection, because I've met enough people to like see the trends and the data. And like step 4, we have like the data entry of our life. But like as a sponsor, I have data entry that I see in my brain that like we're missing the sponsorship connection. And so, yeah, like what works is that like carrying the message to the sick and suffering. And yeah, so like I highly recommend sponsoring. But I wanted to say, I have a quote from page 50. Well, not a quote, but page 50 is like one of my favorite pages. And it just says, like, we talked of intolerance while we were intolerant of ourselves. And that is like very true for me. I wasn't really tolerant of who I was. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. And that's true for me. I definitely had an issue with God, and I was just like, I want nothing to do with it. And I'm really thankful that getting into 12 steps really brought me back to the religion I was raised with, the God I've always known. And it was really through 12 steps, it's through all these other people carrying this message, talking about it and saying like, this really worked, but you have to abandon yourself to God. And like truly and honestly, when I am working my program, like I'm doing a 10-step inventory at night, but also when anything comes up through the day, I'm praying and meditating, and I am sponsoring, but also serving my community and my family. Like life is so much better when I'm really, really close to God. And, it says like deep down, every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And so what I love about this is that we have the fundamental idea, like everybody does, like some people just have lost the way. And that's why I think sponsorship and sponsoring, and it's like a double-sided two-way street. Like for me, it's receiving from the sponsee, but it's also sharing to the sponsee. It's how can I get you to higher power? That is really what it's about. And later on page 50, it's like the testimony. It says like we have a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power, capital P, which is greater than himself, right? And it just talks about like we have different approaches and different ideas, but like this is what worked for all of us, is that we got right with ourselves, we got right with God, and we got right with others. And so, sponsorship was the missing piece. And so, I'm sorry, I'm really excited. And this is my first time sharing here. So I'm a little bit like overwhelmed with the beauty of like being able to speak to everybody here. I do want to say that RECO12 podcast and my sponsor babysat me until I found God. And that's a shout out to Samantha M. on a share. She said her sponsor babysat her. And I also found that like, because I couldn't find God on my own, my sponsor like walked me hand in hand until like I got like right to the connection with God. And then it was like us together. Whenever it's me and my sponsor, it's always God as well. But like having a sponsor was so helpful to find the way to God and to stay close. And okay, so now I'm getting back on my train of thought here. So what I also wanted to speak about in sponsorship is that there is an ultimate authority, right? It's in the traditions, and that ultimate authority is higher power. It's God. And I always think of God as the ultimate sponsor. That was a kind of like an alternate title. And I was like, it was like sponsoring and being sponsored, a pipeline to the power. God is the ultimate authority. Like that was the big title. So I definitely want to like wrap this in there, is that, like God is the ultimate authority of my life. And life is better when I am like approaching it with a lens of like, what does God want me to do here? Is it unselfish, loving, kind, right? Like we have a test, like self-will. Am I in self-will or am I in God's will? And so when I can go to the ultimate sponsor, God, like it's amazing, but it's not so easy. And I think that's why we have sponsorship. And one thing I like to say is that, and many people point this out, it doesn't say sponsorship in the book. It doesn't really say mentorship. It doesn't say anything like that. It doesn't have clear instructions on how to be a sponsor. It just says like, these are the instructions we followed and this is what we did. And so I love it because we all have our own perceptions of how we sponsor. Like even within Big Book sponsorship, we all use the workbook, but some people might do one step a week. Some people might do 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. Like it just is all depending on what's happening with you, your sponsee, and what does God say about the situation? Does God want you to go do another step today? So I definitely view God as the ultimate sponsor. And, part of my addiction is that I came in for slaw, and quickly within about 6 months, I was questioning a lot of things. I was like, am I using alcohol or drugs or sugar in a way that is unhelpful for my life? And I went to the ultimate authority because I had one main sponsor who I love and adore and I talk to every day, like just through our 10 step, we share 10 steps. I didn't go to her. I really went to God. I was spending some time alone in the country that I lived in at the time. And I went to a fellow and I was like, do you drink? And she's like, no, I don't drink, but I definitely like everything that they say about alcoholism, I relate to. And I was like, me too. I was like, maybe I shouldn't drink. She's like, you got to go to God. And I was like, you're right. Like, I got to go to God on this. And so I thought about it and thought about it. And I was like, I'm going to ask God, like, should I continue to drink or use drugs? And God's like, Amanda, like, it doesn't, like, you're using them to numb out. And like, that like decreases our connection together. And maybe you should give it up. And I was like, you know what, God, you're right. Like, I talk to God, and I spend a lot of time on beaches, and I'm very thankful for that portion of my life. And I would just talk to God every day on this beach, and it's like a walking and talking meditation and prayer. And God's really like continues to say like, these things are not helpful to you. And so that's why I really do relate to everyone in like Alcoholics Anonymous and CA and all these other rooms. Like I feel like that. I mean, maybe my addiction was did not bring me in for that, but like I absolutely like just love having like the ultimate sponsor be God, and to be a sponsor that also directs my sponsees, because I am not the ultimate authority. I never tell a sponsee what to do. I always try to direct them back to the instructions of the big book and for them to pray on it, because that's what we're learning here to do. A sponsor is there to share the message, right? The 12 steps, and to like get them to the solution. And in the beginning, we have no idea what's going on. And so the sponsor really just connects you to like the solution, and then should be, I think, encouraging you to, really pray and talk to God and develop that relationship. And, step 11 says we improve, right? So it's not saying like we're going to perfect a relationship with God. It's like constantly improving. And sometimes maybe my prayer and meditation is going to look one way and then it's going to change, but that's like, am I still doing it every day? And that's the key. So God is the ultimate authority. That is something I'm very passionate about. One other thing, what I was speaking about before, and I'm going to go back to, is that, working that step 12, like without being a sponsor yet, right? Maybe you're on steps 1, 2, and 3. Maybe you're stuck on 4. I've seen a lot of people be stuck on 4. This happens. But like, how can you be of service? And like, besides just in the rooms, like we talk about it in all of our affairs. So our job, our families, our community. And something I like to tell people like that I do is that like a smile at strangers, like you can smile and change the whole direction of someone's day. Can you drive on the road and not honk your horn at someone? Can you put a cart away for someone else? Right? Like there's all these things you can do just to do a little bit of service to like bring the light of God out from you and into the world. And I think like another like really like trippy heady thing I think about is that like the instructions in the big book of AA, it's like really just to make the world a better place. And it talks about the principles and about how we should be patient, loving, tolerant. We should never be angry, right? These are very simple concepts that are actually in reality, like pretty easy to do. But in the moment when we're like having a resentment come up or fear, it's hard. And that's why it's like we reach out to a fellow that has an understanding of God, and they're like, hey, did you pray and meditate? Hey, did you do this? Like we all have the same tools. So we should be directing each other back to the source. But I just love to live a life of service. And I think that like when I'm in service, like constantly, my thoughts are constantly turned to service. I stay out of trouble. I stay in that daily reprieve. Part of my addiction is that like I'm selfish and self-centered, right? That's what we talk about in the book. And that I lived a life on fear. And I didn't even know I was an addict until I was 38 years old. And I'm like really thankful that I am. And I've tried to like be really grateful because my life is insanely better for this, like for this knowledge, right? For the facts about my life. I'm just so grateful for recovery, and I try not to feel like shame ever. And like, although like I'm speaking on a platform that like is going to be saved for forever, like I still have not even told my parents because I'm not sure that they understand. But I know that like when the time comes up for me to share, I will. I've shared with certain people know certain information, but I just try to live in these principles and to like make the world a better place, like make the world a better place. I'm like singing that song in my head. But yeah, I just really truly believe that like this way of living will connect you to something so much bigger than yourself that you will never even understand until you're in it, right? And like maybe you're a newcomer, right? And you're like, what is this girl talking about? Like that's not my life right now. And I also can tell you, like when I first came into the rooms, that wasn't my life either. It was so confusing and I did not understand. And yeah, my sponsor asked me all these questions from the workbook and I would say, yes, yes, yes. But maybe I didn't really understand it. And I'm still learning as I go, 1 year, like, let me stay humble for forever. And to know that like, I can always be learning and just like deepening my understanding of what this really is. And I have one quote that I really want to share that I was reading this morning with a sponsee. I was so grateful for that. It was about, it says if sex is very troublesome and, I'm in a sponsorship that like still like muck up the big book. And so I always say like, if life is very troublesome, we throw ourselves harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache, right? That means more amends, right? So when life is troublesome, like I always remember, like when life is troublesome, I'm probably not in God's will. Like when I'm in God's will, like life is smooth, like things are just happening and it's all really like all the puzzle pieces are coming together. But when life is troublesome, I know like something is out of place with God, right? And so how can I get more into service? Do I need another sponsee? Do I need a service role? Do I need to do a community service? Like what is missing? And it's like, I love this way of life because step 10 and 11 will always like bring me back to it. Like step 10 is like, what's coming up today? Like, and I just get to like do this inventory and be self-aware and be a person in the world that wants to make a difference. And sponsorship really like has just like changed my whole life. And in the beginning for me, it was a numbers thing. Like I was like, when can I get to 100 people? And I was like, very like, I want to do this fast and dirty and just get it done. And that is not fair to the sponsee. It's not about rushing them through. And now I just go at the pace that works for us and God. And I don't take on too many. I always ask God, like, is it appropriate for me to take on one more, right? Do I have the time? And so, yeah, sponsorship, if you're wondering, like you've done the steps and your life is not feeling like you're not feeling the promises, I highly recommend going over the workbook. If you're in our fellowship or if you're not in our fellowship, join us. Like, let's get you through this workbook, which is so helpful. It just has the big book condensed into 40 pages and get to sponsoring because that really was the game changer for me. And I have this book that I found that is like, it's called the Recovery in the Torah, right? And the Torah is part of my my religion. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but there's a quote in it. And it says, the second thing that moved Rabbi Korsky was the dedication that people in the program had for one another. There was a true sense of giving and selflessness. The program teaches that to be truly in recovery, one must give of oneself. And that's actually from Bill W. from 1981. And I just love that, like, you can be in this recovery life and have your own religion. And you don't even have to have religion. This is a spiritual program and it's for anyone. And it has like, doctors that approve it and clergymen. And that's what was most helpful for me to know is that like, this is for everyone. This can be for anyone, for anything. And maybe like, I need to use this for internet, like maybe I'm on the internet too much. And like, when I'm ready to abandon myself to God in terms of my scrolling, like, I know I have the tools and the ultimate sponsor, and I have the support system of fellows. If I need to talk about scrolling as a problem, then I know what to do, right? I just have to admit I'm powerless. There's someone bigger than me that can help, and I'm going to let them, right? Like we talk about this, and I just love that the tools are the same for everyone. So I'm going to end there. And with that, I will pass.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks for sharing your experience, strength, and hope on sponsorship. What a beautiful share. What a great story. Thanks for sharing some of those insights. To our live audience here, if you have questions for Amanda, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. It's two speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to those as they come in. Please consider doing that. And I've written down a handful of questions here that I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on some of the things you shared. So I'll jump in there first with one of these. Towards the beginning of your share, Amanda, you talked about when you're on this bus and you listen to this podcast and you went, holy cow, I think I might be one of those, and you went home and you did some research and you said you sat and you cried when you realized it. What in that experience of recognizing I'm an addict, what shame did that bring on? And then what freedom did that bring on when you embraced that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The shame was that like sex and love is like, it kind of feels a little bit for me, it felt a little bit different, like a little bit of like taboo to say you're a sex and love addict. I mean, it goes deeper than just the sex. Like it's all the underlying stuff. It's the validation. It's the fantasy. And so I definitely was like, there was a little bit of shame because like for me to come out and say I'm a sex and love addict, like people, I feel like they're going to judge me. But the thing I understand now is that like only God can really, truly judge me. Like somebody can judge me and I hope that they judge me favorably. But I definitely was like, it's a little bit embarrassing. And I was like, it's shameful. But because I got this information, I was able to, like, when I find out that I'm an addict and I can use Big Book Recovery to work my problems, like that's the solution, right? Like, it's like admitting I'm powerless and yes, there's a solution. So like, it was like right away, I knew there was an answer. And, I speak about this sometimes when I share at meetings is that like, that's the key is like, when you can admit you have a problem, then you can find the solution. And we talk about this in, I believe in our workbook, or maybe I made that up in my head, but like how like the key is just admitting the powerlessness and that there is an answer. And I always think about the 12 steps as like stepping stones, one on top of the other, right? Step 1 is admitting the powerless. And step 2 is like, guess what? Somebody can help you, right? Step 3 is I'm going to let them. And like each one builds on top of each other. So I was just so thankful that there was actually an answer to my problems because I told my husband, like, I'm sorry for cheating on you again. But guess what? I'm a sex and love addict. I can go to AA meetings and like find a solution to my problems. He's like, well, we've never tried this before. And I was like really happy about it. I was crying because I was like, I cheated on you and that sucks. But I was so happy because I was like, this is the one thing I haven't tried. And God's like, you weren't ready up until this moment. And that's why it never happened sooner. And I just know it's like perfectly ordained. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that about, and especially there at the end when you said, God told you you weren't ready for it until this point. So often I talk to people and they say, man, I really wish I would have come into these rooms 20 years ago or, 15 years, however long ago, and started this process. But man, I did the same thing for 30 plus years. I was ripping and running and doing just a disaster, but was not ready. But when I was ready, then the path opened. And thanks for sharing that. I think that, well, it brings a lot of comfort to me and to a lot of people that I say, hey, you just weren't ready and now you are. Let's do this. I want to ask one more question here before we get to the questions from the audience. You mentioned that when you started in the Big Book sponsorship program and in that workbook, one of the things that excited you was, hey, you will become a sponsor. What do you say to those who read that and go, no, I will not become a sponsor? That scares the crap out of me. What do you say to those people in your own experience to help them understand, hey, this isn't as scary as you think it might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had people definitely say like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, well, we can also talk about that later. Like you're going to see that like sponsoring and being sponsored is the key to like staying in recovery, because like we wash, rinse and repeat the method over and over and over. We're able to stay in it. Like I said, the day I'm not sponsoring anymore is the day I'm not reading this workbook on a daily basis. It's the day that I'm going to relapse. I need to constantly be repeating because I have an addict brain. I'm like a fish in a fishbowl, right? They say goldfish have no memories, right? And so I will forget all of this stuff if I don't read it every day. And so I always just tell them like, hey, like it's helped me. It's helped others. Like being a sponsor is so key. And like, you'll just see as you go. But normally by the end, they're like, yeah, I want to go help someone. Like they've had that cosmic change and they're like, I can see how this is beneficial and how like there's nothing to fear, right? Like we ask God to remove the fear at once, like the fear of sponsorship. Like there's nothing to be afraid of. We're just talking. Like even today, like I was scared, like leading up to this, like even I think I had a RECO12 nightmare and I told one of my sponsees and she said, like, if you live in the column 4 of fear, more fear is going to come. And she's like, if you live in the column you want to live in, like more of that will come. So if you live in courageousness and faith, like more of that will come. And I was like, you're right. Like, I don't want to be afraid. Like I can't live in that column anymore. And yeah, it's just like praying to not have the fear. So yeah.
Love that. If you live in column 4 of fear, more fear will come. Time to get out of fear. And this morning I was having some of those nightmares. RECO12 was a part of it, but there was a lot of other things that were coming in. I was like, man, I'm just feeling this fear and that prayer of God, remove my fear. It's a beautiful prayer. All right. We've got several questions that are coming in from our audience. We'll start with a question from Hiba. Hiba says, thanks, Amanda, for this inspiring share. Question: how did you handle coming down from the cloud, like after the first time recovery experience and being in the 4th dimension? And also, how did you handle relapse if that was your experience?
Great questions. How did I handle coming off the cloud? Well, I definitely rode that cloud for as long as possible. And I did so much sponsoring and service. And like, I was just riding this like RECO wave for a long time. But eventually like I came to reality when like, I think it's really at that 6-month mark when I relapsed. I had an emotional affair this time. And it's because parts of my recovery weren't there. I wasn't doing a 10-step. My sponsor, when we did step 10, I said, yeah, I'm going to do this every night. Lies. I didn't do it. And like, she said, are you going to pray and meditate on step 11? I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I did it. I would only do it if like a meeting was doing it for 2 minutes. And I didn't do 10 and 11. I only did 12. I was like, I'm a sponsor. I'm going to sponsor. But in that, I relapsed because I wasn't checking myself. Like step 10 is check yourself before you wreck yourself. And I was not checking myself. I wasn't connecting to the ultimate sponsor. And, God brought me someone that I had an emotional thing with. And it was very much like me being in insanity. And what like brought me to is that like, it was really the big book. And it's so amazing because my husband's not in recovery. And he just, I don't know how he knows the story about acceptance, about the glasses. And I don't know if he like has visions or something. It's crazy. He's like, isn't there a story about the glasses? And we read that together. And I was like, you're right. My glasses for you are on wrong. And like, it was just a beautiful thing that brought me back to reality that like, I am in this marriage and that I can work on this marriage and that like what I'm doing with this other person is not helpful. And what I need to be doing is steps 10, 11, and 12 and to like get into action and like stay in action. And, like maybe I don't meditate for 20 minutes every day because like I'm busy right now, but if I can go into pause land a little bit every day, that's better than not doing it at all. So it's really just checking myself.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that further dive into that, the dealing with those experiences. All right. Next question we're going to go to is from Zach. Zach says, Amanda, thank you so much for your honest and uplifting share. Sometimes I take on sponsees out of a need to try to use sponsorship to fix me. What is your experience on having a healthy relationship with sponsorship and relying on God to heal me rather than trying to force myself to be healed through sponsoring or taking other recovery actions?
Great question. And I've also taken on sponsees because I thought like, if I'm just sponsoring so much, then like, I'm going to be okay. But when in reality, like those sponsees that I've taken on in those moments, like I actually probably never finished with because I didn't ask God before sponsoring them. Like God, is this the right match for me? Like God is the ultimate matchmaker, the ultimate sponsor. And if I really ask God every time, like, am I doing this sponsorship for my ego? So add another number on my list, or am I doing it because I truly want to help the sick and suffering? Like sponsorship for sure. Like in the beginning was like a Band-Aid for me because I really like was missing some things and the whole like God-shaped hole was still gaping. But like now I really, really check in before I take on sponsees. Like I have two. I have one I've been working with since April and one that I started with in May, and I have weekly calls with them. And like, it's so beautiful. Like I don't need to overdo it. Like, and then another person's coming in and it's like, okay, that's 3. And then for now I pause, and it's just constantly pausing and checking and just making sure that you want to work with them too. Like that's just the key. Like you should be lit up. Like, although there's moments where you're like, I don't want to do this today, but like God wants me to do it. But like they should, like, it's a relationship where like it's give and take. And like when I meet with my sponsees, like I'm excited. Like I love them and I love spending time with them. And the ones I stay in touch with afterwards, like those are beautiful connections that I hope to have for the rest of my life. So yeah, just really check in.
Thanks, Amanda. This next question, I think, follows up on that last one fairly well in taking on sponsees to fix yourself or to prove something here. This is from Nira. Nira says, Amanda, I love you so much, you marvelous human. You mentioned going fast with some sponsees in the beginning, and I'm going to build on that and picking up a whole lot of sponsees maybe. How would you go about making amends to earlier sponsees as you continue to grow as a sponsor?
That's a great question, Nira. I love you too. I love everybody that's here. So thank you for being here. I think my amends would be living amends for sure. It's just that I go slower and I really check in with God. Like, does it make sense to pair up 2 steps together or does it not? And does it make sense to finish step 1 in one sitting, or are we going to pause halfway through? I would like to like go over my list, and like there's probably 1 or 2 people that I do need to like circle back to. And it's a great reminder that I can make an amends to them anytime and just apologize and say, hey, I was new. Like I didn't know what I was doing. So that's great. I will check my list, and because I keep a list, like I keep a list of the name, the date we started, and like if we made it through. And there's people that I definitely owe an actual amends, but I think it's just a living amends is going at the pace that God sets for us. And each person is different. And there's no, like people say like, what's a normal rate to go? Like, well, my sponsor took me through for about 1 step a week, right? It took us about 2 months. So there was 1 or 2 that we did pair up. But sometimes like I feel called to do steps 1, 2, and 3 with someone if they've already worked the steps. They've already worked it. Like, let's just go over 1, 2, 3 and get you into the work. So anyway, living amends. Love you, Nira.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Good stuff. All right. You mentioned in your talk a little bit about how you experience God through sponsorship. As I sponsor others, one of the things that I often say to my sponsees is, hey, my job is to take your hand, put it in God's hand, and just walk along with you as God's dragging you, bringing you out of here. I'm just kind of a moral support here. But how have you experienced God differently sponsoring others than you did being sponsored? at being a sponsee going through the steps for the first time?
It's a great question. Like when I was going through the steps of the first time, like I definitely had no problem with step 2. Like, yes, there's something bigger than me and I'm going to let it help me. But like my connection was so weak that like, I just was like, whenever God came through, I was like really excited, but it was like little bits here and there. It was so weak. And then as I grew into a sponsor and as I continue to work this program, it's so much stronger. And it's just like, it's so beautiful because I work for God. Like on page 63, like God is my employer. And I show up and say like, God, what do you want me to do today? And I like kind of think about the day. And it's just like, when I really put like the work I do into God's hands, and this is sponsorship, this is like being a wife, a daughter, a sister, and this is like my career path changing that I'm doing, like everything is really directed. Like God tells me how to be. And like sometimes I mess up, right? And that's what amends are for. Like I'm not always a perfect wife, but like I really try and be like, what does God want me to do in this moment? And so it's just, yeah, it's like David G says, like steps 10, 11, and 12 are like our growth steps. And I just have to always be growing, because if I'm not growing, it's like grow, like the acronym grow or die. Like if I'm not growing my connection to God, like it will get weak and like a relapse is possible. And so as long as I continue to grow in my steps 10, 11, 12, I think that's the key. But as a sponsee, it just wasn't there yet.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we've talked a lot about God in this presentation, in this talk that you're given here, and I'm not averse to that at all. I love it. But you mentioned that when you first came into program, the concept of God was something that you were prickly against. You were kind of opposed to and blocked off to. What changed, and how has that developed? How did that change, I guess, is the question with that.
Yeah. So like I always believed in God and I had a concept of God as a kid. And I thought of God as like the man in the sky. That was like a thing in my little fantasy brain. And I definitely had issues with my religion. So I was like I pushed God away. I wasn't doing anything with my religious community. But, when I became religious, as part of my story is that like, I saw these women that were religious and I saw like, they just had full faith in God, that like everything was exactly, even the bad stuff comes from God. And so when I became religious, I also was like, okay, everything's for the good. Like everything's from God, everything's for the good, even the bad. And that kind of went away because I didn't have 12 steps yet. And I didn't have like a true connection. It was like a false connection with God. Trying to think of how to describe it. It just was really weak. It was false. It was like me, I would pray my prayers, but they weren't really heartfelt. Like they were just like, I don't know. And they were probably selfish prayers because I didn't know that like we don't pray for ourselves, like we pray for others. So I just had to relearn how to like make that connection. And, like we get our own conception. I say God because that's the best way to describe it for me. But some people say spirit. And I think that's beautiful. It's like we get our own conception, and that like, if God doesn't sit well on you, like the book says, like get your own conception. And I think that's beautiful. And that like we get to improve and grow. And yeah, it's just like, it takes time too. It's just like, it's not an overnight matter. We do this for a lifetime. And like my concept of God today, if you ask me in a year, it'll probably change. Like everything will always be changing. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that takes me back to kind of my experience, because I was one that also grew up with the concept of God and thought I had it all figured out, thought I knew what God was, and then I came into program, and eventually, even years after coming into program, I had this awakening of, you know what? I don't know exactly what God is or who God is. And then I read in We Agnostics here on page 44. I love this sentence, and I've mucked it up to add in a little bit of my own thing. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic or religionist, is what I added in there, who thinks they have it all figured out with God, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an addict of the hopeless variety. If I'm so set on what I think God is, even today, and not willing to recognize that I don't understand everything about what this concept of God is, and I never will. I got this human, puny little brain. Then I'm going to get myself in trouble. I've got to be open to what is this concept, and not close off from that. Any other thoughts on that before I go to one, maybe two more questions?
No other thoughts.
Okay, perfect. All right. So you mentioned about service in fellowship. You came in and you are a pretty high energy, get involved type person. I'm sure it wasn't too well. I'm assuming it wasn't too far out of your comfort zone to step in and say, "Hey, where can I serve? How can I help? How can I give back?" Let's talk a little bit to the person who's a little bit more shy, reserved, whatever. How can they give back in whatever aspect they can and start providing service even before getting to step 12?
That's a great question. And yes, I'm like a go-getter. I'm a leader. I like definitely had felt no issue jumping right into any kind of service role that was thrown my way. But I didn't start out in a speaking service role. The first thing I ever did was compile phone lists. And that was just like posting information in the chat. It was quiet. I didn't have to talk. And I just said like, hey, I'm collecting numbers for us to send out so that we can all do outreach. And I would just copy and paste the numbers. And then I would send it to a group and somebody else would send it out. And like, it was so simple. Like there's so many roles within Big Book Sponsorship, which is like the group that I'm in. It's an online group that has meetings of all varieties, right? Like it has DA, OA, SLAW, CODA, like Al-Anon. We have everything. It's so beautiful. There's so many service roles. Like we have note takers, we have phone list people, we have like stuff that you can be quiet on and shy on. And what I do encourage is like start there. And then when God says it's time for you to like speak up and use your voice and be in the rooms, like then take another role because like roles are always opening. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And one other thought I have on that is that, in the big book, it talks about, when I'm giving service, or when I'm like, for example, and I'm going to totally misquote this because it's not a quote, but this is the idea behind it. When I'm working with another, I get as much or more out of it than the person that I'm working with. And it's not that I'm selfish about it. It just works out that way. And so one thought that I have about how I can be of service as a newcomer, if I'm shy or don't want to get my voice out there, is to reach out to somebody else and just say, hey, let's talk. Because when I'm doing that, even if I think it's for me that I need some help and support, I'm actually helping and supporting another person. And that concept, even though that phone sure is heavy to pick up and call somebody else, even to text somebody else, it sometimes is heavy, but it's a really cool way to give service in my experience. All right. We've got a shout out here. This is from Lynette. She says, this is more of a shout out. I'm proud of you and of your recovery journey. And Amanda, I've also kind of watched from the sidelines and closer in of your recovery journey. I'm proud of that also. What are some of the things that as you look back over the last year since you've come into the rooms that you're most grateful for, most amazed by and surprised by?
Well, first of all, thank you both. I love you guys. You've been a big part of my recovery. So I just appreciate you and you're my family now. So it's beautiful. What am I amazed by? And it's just that like, I came in as like a shell of a person, like somebody who wore a mask. And like, this is on your RECO12, like with Michael Brody Waits, he talks about the mask we wear. And I was wearing a mask of who I thought I was supposed to be. And that was like very like cool girl, like that's cool girl Amanda. And although I think I'm still pretty cool, like I come from a completely different place and I feel like the best version of myself. And that I, along with God, my sponsor, the Big Book, and all these tools, like got to create the best version of me. And that like, that can only get better as long as I work this program. And that if I live in this column 5, right, of patience, love, and tolerance and never being angry, like my light is going to shine in such a cool way that I don't have to be that person I used to present to the world. I can be this version of Amanda who I actually like her and I want to spend time with her versus the old Amanda who needed a podcast while she was walking on the beach. She needed to constantly be watching TV. Like I could never be alone with myself because it was so yucky. And now it's like, I can meditate for 15 minutes in silence. Although like I have the monkey mind sometimes, I enjoy myself. And I hope that I get to continue to be humble and grow and to be the best version that God will have me be. And like that I'm always checking in, like, God, is this what you want for me today? So.
Love it. Love it. And I love that you like yourself now, that you can be alone with yourself. That's a concept that is so foreign. It was so foreign to the active addict me. And it's so foreign to so many people that I see coming into the rooms. Yes, I isolated a ton, but I was not alone. I was with the thoughts and the drugs and the whatever else I was dealing with, and what a disaster that was. And now I can be in solitude with me and with my higher power. Beautiful. All right, Amanda, before we start closing out here, it's just a shout out, but I'll read it. Kimia says, amazed by God's demonstration of a miracle called Amanda. Thank you for being who you are, who you truly are. I asked God for you, and God always had you walking towards the path of service and love. Any comments on that, Amanda?
Well, just thank you. Kimia was one of the first people I ever spoke to, and she really got me hooked up with a sponsor. And like, I love the sponsorship connection she created. And, you know, like some people find their own sponsors. And I wasn't one of those people. I did not know how to find one. I asked in other rooms and nobody was offering it. So when I went to her and she's like, I have someone, it was so helpful because I was so scared. And I was like, I'm not going to do this if nobody's going to help me. And I needed help. And so I'm grateful for you and your service. I appreciate everything you do. So thank you, Kimia.
Awesome. All right, Amanda, any final words of wisdom on sponsorship or anything else recovery related that you'd like to close us out with before we do the closing reading?
Well, it's corny, but you know, they say it works if you work it, so work it. And I really truly like believe that. It's like if you do this work, you will get the miracles. But it's simple, but it's not easy. And there is work to do, right? Like step 4, that's work. You have to put pen to paper, and that's not easy. But like I so recommend doing it because that's where you get the facts about your life. Like I behaved in this way, and guess what? I get to be a different person. Like this is like that's what it is. Like I was this. I'm going to be this, and I'm going to pray to God to help me. And I'm very passionate about like people getting into step 4 as quickly as possible between you, God, and whatever. But like, yeah, just do the work because the miracles come true. That's for sure.
Love it. Thank you, Amanda. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting. And if we didn't get to your question, if you're out there in the live audience or if you're in the podcast world, please consider joining our WhatsApp community by sending an email to RECO12pod@gmail.com, RECO12pod@gmail.com, and join in our community, ask those questions, answer other questions that may come up, and let's get in talking about these things. If you are inspired and want to share something of your insights in a 12-step type share, please consider going to the RECO12 Shares SpeakPipe link and record your 3 to 4 minute share there. I've put that link in this chat a couple times. It will be in the show notes of the podcast also. And if you've not yet rated and reviewed RECO12 in Apple Podcasts, please consider going to do so now. It's a great way to work our 12th step in sharing this message with others. I invite the audience to come back next week when we will have another first-time speaker, Gary M., whose topic will be gratitude, realizing that I am a grateful alcoholic. And I look forward to hearing from him. This will be a good one. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the prayer of St. Francis that Amanda will say for us.
Thank you. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. And it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this happy road of destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.